People think marriages end loudly, with a fight, a betrayal, or a slammed door, but mine almost ended silently. On a perfectly ordinary Saturday afternoon in 1963, because of a dress, a vintage petticoat dress that didn't belong to me. A dress that awakened something in my husband I never saw coming. Something that had been sleeping quietly beneath the surface of our marriage for years. And this is the story of how that dress didn't break my home. It saved it. But first, let me tell you exactly how it all began, and why one simple compliment nearly tore us apart. My name is Bella. I was 29 years old when this story took place. The year was 1963. Kennedy was president. The Beatles were just beginning to take over American radio. And I was living what most people would call the American dream. My husband George was 34. An extrovert in every sense of the word. The kind of man who lit up rooms just by walking into them. Curious about everything, quick with a joke, always full of surprises that kept me laughing, kept me guessing, kept me falling in love with him over and over again. We'd been married for 6 years. 6 beautiful, chaotic, perfectly imperfect years. We were the couple that laughed easily, that finished each other's sentences, that danced in the kitchen while the radio played. We had the kind of love that felt easy, natural, like breathing. But even the happiest marriages have shadows. Mine arrived on a Saturday afternoon, wearing a vintage Penelope petticoat dress. And it changed everything. It was early September. That perfect time of year when summer hasn't quite let go, but autumn is already whispering promises of change. I was in the kitchen that afternoon, preparing lunch. The window was open. I could hear birds singing in the backyard. George was in the living room, sprawled across our couch with the newspaper, occasionally reading headlines aloud to me in exaggerated dramatic voices. It was perfect. It was normal. It was us. And then Cynthia knocked on the door. Cynthia was our close family friend. She'd known George since childhood. She was like a sister to me, the kind of woman who stopped by, unannounced, with fresh flowers, or news about neighborhood gossip, or just because she felt like sharing a cup of coffee. I called out from the kitchen, my hands covered in flour. "Honey, could you get the door?" I heard George shuffle across the hardwood floor, heard the door swing open, heard him greet Cynthia with his usual warmth. And then, silence. Not an uncomfortable silence. Not an awkward pause, but a silence that felt full. Heavy with something I couldn't yet name. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked toward the living room, curious about what had stolen my husband's voice. And that's when I saw it. The dress. Cynthia wore a vintage Penelope petticoat dress that looked like it had been pulled straight from the pages of a fashion magazine. It was stunning. The kind of dress that made you stop and stare. Layers upon layers of fabric that moved like water. A fitted bodice that gave way to a full, sweeping skirt that seemed to float with every step she took. But what stopped me in my tracks wasn't the dress itself. It was the look on George's face. He was mesmerized. Completely, utterly transfixed. His eyes followed the movement of that skirt like he was watching something sacred, something revelatory. And then he spoke. "Cynthia, that dress is absolutely magnificent. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like it." His voice was soft. Genuine, filled with an admiration that felt almost intimate. Cynthia laughed, delighted by the compliment. She did a little twirl, and the skirt billowed around her like a cloud. George smiled, but there was something in his eyes, something distant, something I'd never seen before. And then, without another word, he excused himself. Said he needed to grab something from the bedroom. Gave us space to chat. I stood there in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, flowers still on my apron, and felt something shift inside my chest. At that moment, I didn't know what shocked me more, his compliment, or the look in his eyes. Cynthia and I sat at the kitchen table with tea and sandwiches. We chatted about everything and nothing. Her new job, my plans to repaint the guest room, the couple down the street who'd just had twins. And then, casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, she said it. "Your husband really loved my dress, Bella. I must say, he seemed absolutely taken with it." She said it with a smile, with warmth, with no malice at all. But something in those words landed differently than she intended. I felt my stomach twist. Not with anger, not with jealousy, but with something more complicated, more confusing. Shock, curiosity, a tug of insecurity that I couldn't quite name. Because it wasn't about Cynthia, it wasn't about the dress on her body. It was about the way George had looked at it, the way his entire being had seemed to lean toward it, like he wasn't just admiring it, like he was yearning for it. And in that moment, sitting at my kitchen table with my best friend, I realized something. Something deeper was stirring in George. Something he hadn't told me. Maybe something he hadn't even told himself. I didn't feel threatened. I felt awakened. And that day, as Cynthia finished her tea and said her goodbyes, I made a quiet promise to myself. I will save my marriage. Not by fighting this. Not by ignoring it. Not by pretending I hadn't seen what I'd seen. But by understanding it. What George didn't know was that I already had a plan, and when morning came, I wasn't sure if our marriage was about to heal or break in half. The next morning came slowly. I barely slept. My mind raced all night with questions I didn't know how to ask. George seemed quieter than usual at breakfast. He buttered his toast methodically, sipped his coffee, read the paper without really reading it, and I realized he was nervous. He thought I was upset. He thought he'd crossed some invisible line. For a moment, I wondered what if I was opening a door I couldn't close, so I decided to open the door. I put down my coffee cup, took a breath, and with a playful smile, I said what had been sitting on my tongue all night. So, about Cynthia's dress. George's head snapped up. His eyes widened. His face flushed red. For a moment, I thought he might deny it. Laugh it off. Change the subject. But he didn't. He set down his newspaper, looked me straight in the eye, and admitted it. I couldn't stop thinking about it, Bella. I know it sounds strange. I know it probably doesn't make sense. But there was something about that dress. The way it moved. The way it looked. I've never felt that way about clothing before. His honesty hit me like a wave. Not of fear, but of relief. Because in that moment, I knew he wasn't hiding from me. He wasn't betraying me. He was trusting me. And so I asked the question that would change everything. Would you like to try a dress like that? The words hung in the air between us. George hesitated, but only for a second. His eyes lit up, not with embarrassment, not with shame, but with hope. He said yes. Not shy, not ashamed, but honest. And at that moment, I had no idea I was about to meet a new side of the man I married. We went shopping together that afternoon. It felt surreal, like stepping into a dream where the rules had changed, but somehow everything made more sense. We drove to a boutique downtown that specialized in vintage clothing, the kind of place with dresses from the 40s and 50s hanging like artifacts from another era. George was nervous. I could see it in the way he kept his hands in his pockets, the way his eyes darted around the store like he was afraid someone might recognize him. But I was determined. This wasn't about shame. This wasn't about hiding. This was about discovery. We searched through racks together, laughing like teenagers, holding dresses up to the light, imagining what might work. And then I found it. The perfect dress. A vintage 1950s style swing dress, black as midnight, with a fitted bodice that would hug the waist. A square neckline, 3/4 sleeves that ended just below the elbow. But the real magic was in the skirt. A full, wide circle skirt that would flare dramatically with every turn. And underneath, a voluminous, layered petticoat in deep crimson red. The kind of petticoat that would peek out from beneath the hem with every step. Bold, beautiful, impossible to ignore. I held it up for George to see. His breath caught. That's perfect. We gathered the rest. Sheer black gloves, nude fishnet stockings, glossy red high heels, a stylish red fascinator hat to wear at an angle. The woman at the counter smiled knowingly as she rang us up. She didn't ask questions. She didn't judge. She just wrapped everything carefully in tissue paper and handed us the bags. As we walked out of the store, George whispered to me, "This feels like choosing a new chapter." And I realized he was right. This wasn't just shopping. This was transformation. We came home and locked the door behind us. The house felt different, charged with possibility. I spread everything out on our bed. The dress, the petticoat, the gloves, the stockings, the heels, the hat. He sat at the edge of the bed, hands folded tightly. He looked like someone waiting for a truth they weren't sure they were ready to face. But we didn't start with the clothes. We started with makeup. I sat George down at my vanity. The same vanity where I did my makeup every morning. The same mirror where I checked my lipstick before we went out dancing. But today, it was his turn. I started with foundation. Light. Subtle. Just enough to even out his skin tone. I applied it with a damp sponge, dabbing gently across his forehead, his cheeks, his chin. George closed his eyes. His breathing slowed. "How does it feel?" I asked. "Cool," he whispered. "Soft? Strange. But good." Next came the contour. I used a soft brush to add definition to his cheekbones, to shape his jawline just slightly. Then a rosy blush across the apples of his cheeks. Warm. Feminine. Gentle. I could see his face changing. Not drastically, but enough. Then came the eyes. I lined them carefully. A vintage 60s flick at the outer corners. Sharp. Elegant. The kind of eyeliner that made eyes look like they held secrets. George opened his eyes when I told him to, and he gasped. They looked different. Bigger. Brighter. More expressive. I added mascara. Slow, careful strokes. His lashes darkened and lengthened. And then, the final touch. Classic, deep red lipstick. I applied it slowly, tracing the shape of his lips with precision, filling them in with bold, unapologetic color. When I stepped back, George stared at himself in the mirror. His hands were shaking. "I never thought I'd feel this," he whispered. "Feel what?" I asked gently. He looked at me. His eyes were glassy with emotion. "Beautiful." Now came the petticoat. I held it up for him to see. 2 tiers of ruffled perfection. 100% polyester. A layer of tulle that gave it structure. A ruffled hem that added volume. An elastic, adjustable waistband that would sit comfortably at the waist. Fully lined for comfort. George stepped into it carefully. I pulled it up over his hips and adjusted the waistband. And immediately, everything changed. The petticoat wasn't just fabric, it was transformation. It was soft. It swished with every tiny movement. It bounced when he took a step. It changed his posture instantly, making him stand taller, straighter. George looked down at himself, at the layers of crimson-red tulle billowing around his legs. It's so light," he said. "Like I'm wearing a cloud." I smiled. Now for the dress. I carefully lifted the black swing dress and held it open for him. He slipped his arms through the sleeves. I guided it over his head. It slid down over the petticoat like it was always meant to be there. I zipped it up the back, adjusted the neckline, smoothed the fabric across his shoulders. The dress fit perfectly. The bodice hugged his waist. The square neckline framed his collarbones. The 3/4 sleeves ended just where they should. And the skirt. The skirt was magic. It flared out dramatically over the petticoat. The crimson-red layers peeked out from beneath the black fabric with every movement. Bold. Eye-catching. Impossible to ignore. George turned slowly. The skirt swirled around him like water. "Oh my God," he breathed. "Now for the finishing touches." I handed him the sheer black gloves. He pulled them on slowly, smoothing them up his forearms. The fishnet stockings came next. He sat on the edge of the bed and rolled them up his legs carefully, adjusting them at the thigh. Then the red heels. Glossy. Bold. With a modest heel that he could actually walk in. He stood shakily. Found his balance. And finally I placed the red fascinator hat on his head. Angled it just right. Pinned it in place. I stepped back, and there he was. George. My husband. Transformed. George turned toward the full-length mirror in our bedroom, and he froze. His hands flew to his mouth, his eyes filled with tears. He turned slowly, watching the way the skirt moved, the way the petticoat swirled beneath it, the way the red fabric caught the light. He whispered so quietly I almost didn't hear him. "I love it. Bella, I love it." And then he started to cry. Not tears of sadness, but tears of release, of recognition, of finally seeing something he'd been hiding even from himself. I walked up behind him, put my arms around his waist, rested my chin on his shoulder. We stood there together, looking at our reflection, and I realized something profound. He didn't just love the dress. He loved the feeling it gave him, the freedom, the permission to be something he'd never allowed himself to be. And he loved me for giving it to him. We laughed, we cried, we danced in our bedroom to no music at all. And in that moment, our marriage wasn't breaking, it was being reborn. That day changed everything. Not because George started wearing dresses every day. Not because our entire life shifted. But because we learned something most couples never do. Understanding your partner saves marriages. Curiosity is not betrayal. Acceptance transforms relationships. Love grows when you give it room to breathe. This wasn't the day I lost my husband. It was the day I met him all over again. If you enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Share your thoughts, your experiences, your own moments of transformation. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me for more stories that explore love, identity, and the unexpected moments that shape our lives. Because sometimes, the smallest piece of fabric carries the biggest truths. Join me next time for another story about love, identity, and the moments that change us in ways we never expect. The end.
The Gender Diary exists to light that path with shared stories. Whether you found connection in this narrative, you're on your own journey of gender exploration, or you're here seeking understanding, your subscription fuels our mission. Every subscriber empowers us to keep illuminating these authentic experiences for our community. Kindly drop a comment below. Your voice adds to the tapestry of experiences that makes this space meaningful. Until our next story unfolds.